Horse with incurable disease is donated to woman. But days later, something incredible happens. Sarah Mitchell took a deep breath as she hung up the phone, feeling the weight of the decision she had just made. At 45, the retired veterinarian never imagined her small refuge in Colorado, where she cared for abandoned animals, would face such a massive challenge. The afternoon sun streamed through the wooden windows of her modest home, illuminating her hands, which still trembled slightly. After the call, 20 years spent tending to competition animals at prestigious stables, and now in her early retirement, she sought only the peace of her inherited family farm. The call had come from the renowned Westridge Stables, one of the largest racehorse, breeding and training centers in the United States. Brian, the manager, had been direct and impersonal. A thoroughbred horse, valued at hundreds of thousands of dollars, a champion in national and international races, was being discarded simply because it had a degenerative muscular disease deemed incurable. "If you don't take him, we'll have to put him down this week," the stable manager said coldly. "The owner has already spent a fortune on experimental treatments and doesn't want to prolong the inevitable." Sarah felt her heart clench, and a sudden anger surged through her. Since childhood, growing up on her parents' farm, she had never understood how people could treat animals like disposable goods. Even without ever seeing the horse, she already felt a connection to this creature, cast aside for no longer being profitable. Memories of her childhood surfaced. The first foal she helped deliver at 12 against her father's wishes, who thought it wasn't work for a girl. That was the moment she decided to become a veterinarian. "I'll take him," Sarah replied before even checking her finances or considering the limited space at her small farm in Boulder, near Denver. Her savings were nearly depleted after renovating the main stable and building a small paddock for rescued animals. Her last paycheck as head veterinarian at the Colorado Equestrian Center had run out months ago. "It doesn't matter," she thought. "Firmly, I'll make it work." "Are you sure?" the manager asked, surprised by her quick response. "This animal will require intensive, expensive care. I can send the medical reports so you can assess the situation before deciding." "That won't be necessary," she replied firmly. "If you're going to put him down anyway, I'd rather try. I can pick him up tomorrow." "Actually," the manager hesitated, "Mr. Blackwood insisted he be removed today. He's affecting the other animals' morale. I can send a team to deliver him in 2 hours." Sarah glanced around. The stable wasn't fully ready. She still needed to organize medications, prepare proper bedding, but the urgency in the manager's voice left no doubt. The horse needed rescuing now. "Send him," she said, her heart racing with the adrenaline of the challenge she was taking on. "I'll be waiting." The next morning, the Westridge Stables truck pulled up at the gate of New Beginning Farm. The luxurious vehicle, emblazoned with the stable's logo, looked out of place on the dirt road leading to Sarah's simple property. Her heart tightened as she watched the handlers lower the ramp and lead the horse out. Her neighbors, small-scale farmers, paused their work to watch the unusual arrival. Mrs. Eleanor, a 70-year-old woman who had lived on the neighboring property for decades, approached the fence, curious to see the new resident. The horse that stepped forward was unrecognizable compared to the competition photos attached to his paperwork. Sarah felt a lump in her throat when she saw him for the first time, fully aware of the gravity of the challenge ahead. Windrunner, as he was registered, was a beautiful chestnut who had once won major equestrian competitions. At 7 years old, he had reached the peak of his career when the first symptoms appeared. Now his once glossy coat was dull, his ribs prominent from muscle loss, and his eyes, once lively according to photos, seemed empty. His legs trembled visibly as he struggled to walk to the paddock. Sarah noted every detail with a clinical eye. The uneven posture, the lowered head, the slightly labored breathing, even with minimal effort. Her mind was already cataloguing symptoms, possibilities, and contradictions in the official diagnosis. "There's your problem," commented one of the handlers, handing her a thick folder of documents. "The owner said he spent a fortune on treatments, but nothing worked. The best vets in the country have already given up on him." The man, a young guy around 25 in the immaculate Westridge Stables uniform, had a look of disdain as he glanced at the horse. There was also something else in his expression, a mix of relief and guilt that didn't escape Sarah's notice. "How long has he been like this?" she asked, flipping quickly through the documents while keeping her eyes on the horse. "It started about 8 months ago," the handler replied with a shrug. "At first it was just slight tremors after races. Then it got worse. The last 2 months have been... Well, you can see for yourself." Sarah noticed the young man avoided looking into Windrunner's eyes, as if the horse's condition deeply unsettled him. It wasn't indifference, she realized, but an attempt at emotional distance. "Did you take care of him at the stables?" she asked gently. The young man hesitated, glancing nervously at the older colleague supervising the handoff. "Yes, ma'am, since he arrived 4 years ago." "And what's your name?" "Mike, ma'am. Mike Reynolds." Sarah slowly approached the horse, extending her hand so he could catch her scent. Windrunner shied away, wary, his eyes wide with a fear that broke Sarah's heart. She stayed perfectly still, just waiting, letting the animal decide whether to come closer. After nearly a minute, he stretched his neck, his flared nostrils sniffing her outstretched hand. "It's okay, boy, you're home now," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll take care of you." Her eyes met the horse's, and for a brief moment Sarah felt a deep connection, as if the animal understood exactly what she was saying. There was intelligence in that gaze, an awareness that transcended physical pain. Mike, the young handler, watched the scene with a mix of admiration and skepticism. When his older colleague returned to the truck to fetch some of the horse's belongings, he timidly approached Sarah. "Ma'am," he began, lowering his voice, "there's something I need to tell you about his treatment at the stables." Sarah looked at the young man, noticing his discomfort. "What is it, Mike?" "The medications," he hesitated, glancing nervously at the truck. "I'm not sure, but I don't think they were always given as they should have been. The head vet, Dr. Thompson, his voice faltered. "He what, Mike?" "He and Mr. Blackwood argued a lot. I overheard things about experiments, drug trials." Mike ran a hand through his hair, clearly distressed. "Windrunner got worse after certain injections, but they kept going anyway. I tried to speak up once and almost lost my job." The older colleague returned, cutting the conversation short. "Mike, let's go. Mr. Blackwood called, demanding we be back by noon." The young handler cast one last look at Sarah. "Please help him," he murmured before walking away. The older handler laughed dismissively as he watched Sarah and the horse. "You're being optimistic, ma'am. That horse won't last another month." Sarah ignored the comment, quickly signing the transfer papers. Her eyes scanned the fine print of the contract, noticing several odd clauses about research rights and intellectual property that seemed out of place in a simple animal donation document. She hesitated briefly when reading a specific clause, stating that any method, technique, or treatment developed during the animal's care would remain the exclusive property of the donor. With her pen hovering over the paper, she gave the older handler a questioning look. "What does this clause about treatment ownership mean?" The man shrugged indifferently. "Standard in the stable's paperwork. Just sign the last page, please." Sarah bit her lip, thoughtful. Something wasn't right. Why would a stable include such a clause when getting rid of an animal deemed beyond saving? Determined not to lose the chance to help Windrunner, she crossed out the problematic clause with an X and added her initials in the margin before signing. "I won't accept this part," she stated firmly, handing back the papers. "If the animal is being donated, there's no claim to any future treatments I develop." The handler frowned, examining the modified document. "Mr. Blackwood won't like this." "Mr. Blackwood was about to euthanize this animal," Sarah retorted. "Either accept the modified terms or take Windrunner back, but then you'll have to admit you never intended to put him down." The man hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. After a brief phone call with someone Sarah assumed was the stable manager, he reluctantly nodded. "From now on, he's my responsibility," Sarah said, instinctively positioning herself between the man and the horse, as if to shield him. When the truck drove away, Sarah was left alone with Windrunner in the small stable she'd hastily prepared. Though simple, the structure was clean and comfortable, with fresh hay, clean water, and enough space for the animal to move, if he could. The afternoon sun streamed through the cracks in the newly repaired roof, casting golden patterns on the packed dirt floor. Sarah brought over a wooden chair and sat near the horse, keeping enough distance not to pressure him but close enough to establish a steady presence. The horse barely moved, his muscles twitching involuntarily in painful spasms. With each stronger contraction, he let out a faint whimper that broke Sarah's heart. "It's just you and me now, buddy," she murmured, pulling a small notebook from her pocket. "Let's figure out what's really going on with you." For hours, Sarah stayed there, simply observing and taking detailed notes on Windrunner's behavior, his symptoms, his breathing, the frequency and intensity of his tremors, the moments when they seemed to worsen or ease. As a veterinarian, specializing in equines for over 20 years before retiring, she'd seen many difficult cases, but never anything like this. Windrunner, in turn, seemed to study her too. His intelligent eyes followed her every move, showing an awareness that starkly contrasted with his weakened body. Sometimes when their eyes met, Sarah had the impression he was trying to communicate something, an urgency beyond the physical pain. By late afternoon, Mrs. Eleanor, her elderly neighbor, appeared at the stable carrying a basket covered with a colorful cloth. "Brought you some tea and cookies, dear," the woman said in her thick Colorado accent. "Thought you might need them." Sarah smiled, genuinely grateful. "Thank you, Mrs. Eleanor. You're an angel." The elderly woman cautiously approached the horse, her wise eyes assessing the animal. "Poor thing," she murmured. "He's suffering a lot, isn't he?" "Yes," replied Sarah, accepting the hot cup of tea. "But there's something odd about this case. The symptoms don't quite match the diagnosis in the documents." Mrs. Eleanor nodded as if unsurprised. "Not everything from those big places is true, dear. My late husband always said where there's too much money, there's plenty of lies." Sarah smiled sadly. "You might be right. Something tells me there's more to this story than meets the eye." "And what will you do?" Sarah looked at Windrunner, whose eyes remained fixed on her, as if anxiously awaiting her answer. "I'll find out the truth," she said firmly, "and I'll help him, no matter what it takes." That night, after settling Windrunner with fresh water and quality hay, Sarah sat at the kitchen table of her simple home, a century-old building that had belonged to her parents and grandparents before her. The oil lamp cast shadows on the wall as she spread out the extensive medical records accompanying the animal. Stacks of papers covered the table, test reports, records of experimental treatments, opinions from renowned specialists, scientific articles about the condition. Most bore the official stamp of Westridge Stables and the Integrated Veterinary Clinic, where Windrunner had been treated. As she organized the documents chronologically, Sarah reflected on her own professional journey. Graduating with honors, from Colorado State University, she had turned down lucrative offers from major stables to work for a non-profit providing free veterinary care to poor rural communities. It was only after her parents' death 5 years ago that she returned to the family farm and later accepted the role of head veterinarian at the Colorado Equestrian Center, a position she left just a year ago, weary of the constant pressure, to prioritize competition results over animal welfare. Adjusting her reading glasses, Sarah began scrutinizing the medical reports with a critical eye. Everything pointed to the same diagnosis: equine degenerative myopathy, a rare condition that progressively weakened the animal's muscles until complete paralysis set in. The reports described the initial symptoms, mild tremors after exercise, that gradually worsened to the current state. But the more she read, the more Sarah felt something didn't add up. Windrunner's symptoms had peculiarities that didn't align with the typical pattern of equine degenerative myopathy. Most notably, the disease's extremely rapid progression and the pattern of tremors, which seemed to intensify with specific sound stimuli, a detail only briefly mentioned in some reports but one Sarah had clearly observed during the day. She kept reading every detail. Each medication tried, each protocol followed. That's when she noticed something truly strange. Several medications had been administered at doses far exceeding medical recommendations, and some treatments had been abruptly discontinued, just as they showed signs of improvement. "This doesn't make sense," she murmured to herself, checking the dates of administration and comparing them with notes on Windrunner's behavior after each procedure. A disturbing pattern began to emerge. Whenever a treatment showed promising, Improvement dosages were drastically increased to levels that could cause severe side effects, or the treatment was abandoned altogether in favor of a new experimental approach. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. With years of experience, she began to suspect something was deeply wrong with the treatment. It didn't seem like the protocols had been followed with the genuine intent to heal the animal. On the contrary, the evidence suggested someone had deliberately sabotaged Windrunner's chances of recovery. "But why?" she murmured, looking at the photograph of Windrunner in his glory days attached to the file. In the image, the magnificent chestnut horse soared over a jump at an international competition, his perfect form frozen in a moment of sheer power and grace. Why would anyone do this to you? The answer, Sarah knew, wouldn't be in the official documents. Grabbing a red marker, she began circling inconsistencies, jotting down questions in the margins, and connecting events that seemed related. By the time the kitchen clock struck 3 in the morning, she had a complex map of circumstantial evidence pointing to a disturbing conclusion. Windrunner wasn't receiving treatment to be cured. He seemed to be part of some undocumented scientific experiment. With this terrible suspicion in mind, Sarah finally went to bed. But sleep didn't come easily. In her mind, Windrunner's intelligent eyes pleaded not just for healing, but for justice for what had been done to him. The next morning, Sarah woke before sunrise and went straight to the stable, carrying a small backpack with supplies she'd prepared during her sleepless night. The sky was still dark, dotted with fading stars, and a light mist covered the farm fields. Along the way, she stopped to gather some wild herbs growing at the edge of the property: arnica, horsetail, and calendula, plants her grandmother, Willow, a descendant of Navajo people, had taught her to identify and use. Windrunner lay in the same spot where she'd left him, but his eyes were open, watching her with what seemed like a spark of interest. Hearing Sarah's footsteps, he tried to lift his head, but his neck trembled with the effort and he gave up, letting out a soft whinny of frustration. "Good morning, champion," she said softly, approaching with a bucket of warm water mixed with organic honey and the freshly picked herbs. The gentle medicinal scent filled the stable air. "We're starting our own treatment today." Sarah knew she was going against all conventional medical advice. The reports recommended complete rest and a regimen of strong medications to control symptoms, the same medications she suspected had worsened the animal's condition rather than improved it. But years of working with rescued animals had taught her that sometimes her grandmother's traditional methods worked where modern medicine failed. Willow had been the respected healer of her small community, blending ancestral knowledge with a sharp intuition for suffering. Sarah remembered following her as she treated farm animals, listening to her explanations about each plant, each massage technique, each tone of voice that could soothe a creature in pain. "Listen with your heart, not just your ears," her grandmother used to say. "Animals speak to us all the time, but few know how to hear." With gentle motions, Sarah began massaging Windrunner's stiff muscles with a special oil made from local herbs, warmed to the exact temperature her grandmother had taught her. The horse resisted at first, letting out a low whinny of protest, but gradually relaxed under Sarah's firm, steady touch. "You're a fighter, aren't you?" she whispered, methodically working each tense muscle, from his powerful neck down to the long legs that had once galloped so fast they barely seemed to touch the ground. "We're not giving up that easily." Sarah spoke continuously to Windrunner in a soft, melodious tone, sharing stories of her childhood on the farm, her grandmother Willow, and the other animals she had rescued and healed against all odds. The content of the words didn't matter. She knew. It was the consistency of communication, the establishment of a connection that went beyond formal language. As the rising sun began to light the stable through the cracks in the roof, Sarah noticed something remarkable. Windrunner's tremors, so violent and constant since his arrival, seemed to lessen slightly during the massage, especially when she hummed quietly. It was a subtle response, almost imperceptible to less experienced eyes, but to Sarah it was the first spark of hope. "We're finding our way, aren't we?" she murmured, making a mental note to record this observation in her treatment journal. Her scientific mind was already forming hypotheses about the true nature of Windrunner's condition. theories that challenged the official diagnosis but could explain the anomalies she had observed in his symptoms. In the days that followed, Sarah established a strict routine, dividing her time between caring for Windrunner and relentless research on equine neurological and muscular conditions. Her small office became an improvised research center, with printed scientific papers covering the walls, sticky notes connecting ideas and theories, and a detailed timeline of Windrunner's treatments at Westridge Stables. In the morning, massages, with special oils prepared from her grandmother's medicinal herbs. Sarah had adjusted the traditional proportions based on modern studies about the anti-inflammatory and pain-relieving properties of certain plant compounds. The massages followed a specific sequence, starting at the points where the tremors originated and gradually expanding to larger areas of the body. At midday, a nourishing mixture of selected herbs and grains, supplemented with specific vitamins, Sarah believed could aid neurological regeneration. She had developed the formula based on both her grandmother's ancestral knowledge and the latest studies on equine nutrition for degenerative diseases. In the afternoon, gentle exercises to maintain circulation, even if it only meant helping Windrunner stand for a few minutes. Sarah used a suspension system she had improvised with ropes and a padded harness, allowing the horse to experience an upright position without putting excessive weight on his weakened limbs. During these moments, she carefully observed how the tremors responded to controlled movement, noting patterns that contradicted the literature on classic equine degenerative myopathy. In the evening, warm compresses on his trembling limbs followed. By a sensory stimulation session involving gradual exposure to different sounds, textures, and scents, Sarah had noticed that certain calming sounds, particularly her singing voice, seemed to significantly reduce the tremors, while sharp or sudden sounds dramatically intensified them. This observation reinforced her growing suspicion that the neurological component of the condition was more significant than the original diagnosis suggested. Between treatment sessions, Sarah continued her investigation into Westridge Stables and its owner, Jonathan Blackwood. Using her old laptop, she searched for news articles, scientific publications, and any available information about the stable's practices. She discovered that Jonathan, besides being a successful businessman in the horse breeding industry, had recently made heavy investments in a pharmaceutical company specializing in veterinary medicines, information that deepened her suspicions about the true nature of Windrunner's treatment. On the third day, Sarah noticed that Windrunner had stopped eating. He refused even the freshest hay and cleanest water, turning his muzzle away when she tried to offer the carefully prepared nutrient mix she had made for him. Upon examining him closely, she saw his temperature had risen slightly, and the tremors had grown more intense, especially around his neck and jaw. Worried by this sudden change, and fearing it might be a reaction to the new treatment regimen, she decided to spend the entire night in the stable, monitoring any shifts in his condition. She improvised a bed from hay bales covered with an old blanket, positioning herself so she could keep a constant watch on Windrunner. The hours dragged by as darkness enveloped the farm. Sarah fought exhaustion, checking her watch periodically and jotting notes by the dim light of a flashlight. Around midnight, worn out after 3 days of intense work and relentless worry, she began to feel the weight of the challenge she had taken on. "What if I'm wrong?" she murmured to herself, watching Windrunner's still form in the shadows. "What if I'm just prolonging his suffering?" Doubt, the inevitable companion of any act of courage, settled heavily on her shoulders. Maybe the specialists were right. Maybe equine degenerative myopathy truly was incurable, and all her efforts were just stubborn denial of the inevitable. Perhaps the most compassionate thing really would be to end the animal's suffering, as Westridge Stables had suggested. It was during this long vigil, in the darkest hour of the night when even the crickets had gone silent, that something extraordinary happened. Exhausted and anxious, fighting off the sleep threatening to overtake her, Sarah began softly singing an old lullaby her grandmother Willow used to sing to her during stormy nights when childhood fear of thunder kept her awake. "Sleep, sleep, little horse, for the night has come. Close your eyes so slow, let the moon hold you close." The gentle, almost hypnotic melody echoed in the quiet stable, bringing with it memories of comfort and safety. Sarah sang more for herself than for Windrunner, drawing strength from the ancient words to keep believing. Then she noticed Windrunner had lifted his head and was looking straight at her, his ears swiveling toward the sound, focused with an intensity she hadn't seen since his arrival. The tremors that had constantly racked his body seemed to lessen significantly, almost as if the music had soothed not just his mind, but his rebellious muscles too. "You like this, don't you?" she asked, briefly pausing her song. The moment. Her voice shifted from melody to normal speech. Windrunner's tremors flared up again. Sarah's eyes widened as a connection formed in her scientific mind. "It's the sound frequency," she whispered, awed by the discovery. "His nervous system responds differently to specific sound frequencies." Quickly she resumed singing, carefully observing how Windrunner's body reacted. Without a doubt, there was a direct correlation between the soft, low-frequency melody and the reduction of his tremors. It was as if the sound created some kind of positive interference in his dysfunctional neural pathways. The horse responded with a quiet whinny, the first voluntary sound he had made since arriving. Her equine voice, normally powerful, sounded fragile and hesitant, yet carried an unmistakable note of response, almost as if trying to follow the melody. Inspired by this extraordinary reaction, Sarah continued singing, moving slowly through the stable while massaging the animal's neck with long, fluid motions, synchronized with the rhythm of the song. She occasionally varied the pitch and melody, mentally noting how each change affected Windrunner's tremors. The hours slipped by unnoticed as Sarah explored this unexpected therapeutic avenue. By the time the first rays of sunlight began to illuminate the stable, she had mentally compiled a detailed record of which sounds seemed most effective in reducing the tremors and which appeared to worsen them. To her astonishment, Windrunner tried to stand. With great effort and violent shaking, he managed to brace his front legs and, in a determined movement that revealed the willpower still residing in that weakened body, pushed himself up until he was completely upright. He remained like that, swaying but resolute for nearly a minute before collapsing back onto the straw, exhausted by the monumental effort. Sarah could barely contain her excitement. She rushed to her notebook and meticulously recorded the event, including the exact time, the duration of the upright stance, and all the circumstances that had preceded this significant milestone. It was a small step, almost insignificant by the standards of what Windrunner had once been capable of in his glory days, but it represented an extraordinary breakthrough for an animal experts had condemned to imminent paralysis. "You're amazing," she whispered, stroking Windrunner's muzzle as he panted heavily from the exertion, "and you've just given me the key to understanding what's really happening to you. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now continuing. The next morning, Sarah woke to the sound of a car pulling up in front of her property. It was her neighbor, Dr. George Harris, a retired physician who lived on the farm next door, and often questioned her unconventional treatment methods. "Good morning, Sarah," he greeted, carrying a basket of fresh bread and local cheese. "I came to see how you're doing with your new patient." Sarah led him to the stable, where Windrunner lay with his head raised, watching the visitors intently. "So this is the famous racehorse they handed over to you for—" George hesitated, searching for the right words. "For me to care for in his final days?" Sarah finished. "Yes, that's him, but I believe his final days may still be far off." George frowned, examining the animal with a clinical eye. "Sarah, you know I'm your friend, and I admire your work with rescued animals, but—" he lowered his voice. "This horse is clearly suffering the tremors, the muscle loss. I saw the reports you showed me. It's a terminal condition." Sarah crossed her arms defensively. "And so I should give up on him?" "I'm saying that sometimes the most compassionate thing we can do is ease the suffering," George replied gently. "I know a colleague, a vet, who could come here and—" "No!" Sarah interrupted firmly. "He made progress last night. He stood on his own." George sighed, clearly skeptical. "Sarah, you know how these cases go. There can be moments of apparent improvement before the—" He didn't finish the sentence, because at that very moment, to both their astonishment, Windrunner began to move. With visible effort, the horse braced his front legs and, trembling but determined, rose until he was completely upright. Sarah and George stood in absolute silence, afraid that any sound might break the moment. Windrunner remained on his feet, trembling less than the night before, his eyes fixed on Sarah. "My God," George murmured, genuinely impressed. "This is unexpected." Sarah slowly approached Windrunner, gently stroking his muzzle. "This isn't a last effort before the end, George. It's the beginning of recovery." George, still visibly surprised, adjusted his glasses and stepped closer to examine the animal. "The medical reports were conclusive, Sarah. This condition has no known cure." "Maybe the reports were wrong, or maybe the diagnosis was," she replied, recalling the inconsistencies she had noticed in the documentation. "Or perhaps we're witnessing something conventional medicine can't yet explain." In the days that followed, Sarah intensified her treatment regimen. In addition to massages and special feed, she began adding small exercises. At first, it was just a few steps inside the stable, with Sarah supporting most of Windrunner's weight, using a special harness she had improvised. A week after George's visit, Sarah was surprised by another unexpected guest. A luxury car pulled up in front of the farm, and out stepped a man in an impeccable suit, his expression arrogant. "Good morning," he said without introducing himself. "I'm looking for Sarah Mitchell." "That's me," Sarah answered, wiping her hands on her apron as she approached the gate. "Excellent. My name is Jonathan Blackwood, owner of Westridge Stables." He extended a business card. "I've come regarding the horse Windrunner." Sarah felt a knot in her stomach. The stable's name was familiar. It was all over Windrunner's paperwork. "What can I do for you?" "The horse was legally donated to my property. I have all the signed documents." Jonathan smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "There's been a misunderstanding, Mrs. Mitchell. Windrunner was never meant to be donated. He belongs to a valuable bloodline, and I intend to use him for breeding. Of course, I'm willing to compensate you financially for the inconvenience." Sarah crossed her arms, feeling anger rise within her. "Inconvenience? You call it an inconvenience to abandon a sick animal to its fate? Your own employees told me he'd be euthanized if I didn't take him." Jonathan's smile vanished, replaced by a stern expression. "My employees were not authorized to make such an offer. I'm here to take him back. Where is he?" "You're not taking him anywhere," Sarah said firmly. "I have legal donation papers, signed by your stable manager, with express authority to act on your behalf. Windrunner is under my care now." Jonathan took a step forward, his posture intimidating. "Mrs. Mitchell, I didn't come here to argue. I came for my horse. If you prefer to settle this in court, I have the resources for a lengthy legal battle." "Then that's what we'll do," Sarah replied without backing down an inch. "Because Windrunner isn't leaving." Jonathan gave her an icy glare before turning back to his car. "You'll regret this, Mrs. Mitchell, very soon." As the car drove away, kicking up dust on the dirt road, Sarah felt her legs weaken. She knew she didn't have the resources to fight a man like Jonathan Blackwood in court. But something in her gut told her there was more to this story than met the eye. That night, Sarah went through Windrunner's paperwork again, with even greater care. As she reviewed the medication records, she noticed a disturbing pattern. Whenever the horse showed signs of improvement with any treatment, the dosage was drastically increased until it worsened, or the treatment was completely stopped. "This can't be a coincidence," she murmured to herself. Something even more disturbing caught her attention. The signature of the veterinarian responsible for Windrunner's recent treatments looked vaguely familiar. Examining it more closely, Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she recognized the handwriting. It was Richard Walker, her former college classmate and current business partner of Jonathan Blackwood in several ventures. The pieces were starting to fall into place. But why would anyone deliberately sabotage the treatment of such a valuable animal? The next morning, Sarah was awakened by the sound of several cars pulling up in front of her property. Looking out the window, she saw a small crowd gathering. She recognized several faces of locals, people whose animals she had treated over the years. Confused, she stepped outside to greet them. It was Mrs. Eleanor, a 70-year-old woman whose goat Sarah had saved the year before, who stepped forward. "We've come to help, Dr. Mitchell," she said, determination in her aged eyes. "We know about the sick horse and the threats from that wealthy man." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. "How did you find out?" "Old Jim told us," Mrs. Eleanor replied. "We're organizing a fundraiser to help cover the treatment costs and hire a lawyer if needed." Sarah was deeply moved by the community's support. As she thanked them emotionally, she noticed Jessica Thompson, the young reporter from the local paper, taking photos and jotting notes. "Dr. Mitchell, could you tell me more about this case?" Jessica asked, stepping closer with her recorder. "It seems like a real David and Goliath story our readers would love to hear." Initially reluctant to expose the situation, Sarah realized publicity might be her best defense against Jonathan's threats. She led the reporter to the stable, where Windrunner stood, still trembling slightly, but clearly stronger than in previous days. "My goodness, he's beautiful," Jessica remarked, snapping a few photos. "And you're saying experts considered him a lost cause?" "Not just that," Sarah replied, showing the medical records. "I believe something very strange is going on. His treatment seems to have been deliberately sabotaged." Jessica's eyes sparkled with journalistic interest. "Do you have proof of that?" "Only my observations as a vet," Sarah admitted. "But why would someone donate a valuable thoroughbred, only to come back days later demanding its return?" As they spoke, the community members had organized a small impromptu gathering in the farmyard. Someone brought a guitar, and soon music and lively chatter filled the air. Windrunner in the stable seemed to respond positively to the sound of music, his ears twitching with interest. Inspired, Sarah led Windrunner outside so he could join the gathering in his own way. With the help of old Jim, a long-time ranch hand, she guided the horse slowly to a small pen near the gathering. The crowd watched in awe as the majestic animal, though weakened, held himself with dignity. Children cautiously approached to offer carrots and apples, which Windrunner accepted gently. It was in this moment of celebration that disaster struck. One of the young boys, excited by the music, popped a balloon. The sudden noise startled Windrunner, sending him into a panic. His muscles, already weakened by illness, seized violently, in spasms. The horse whinnied in agony before collapsing heavily to the ground, trembling uncontrollably. The crowd recoiled in shock as Sarah rushed to help the animal. George quickly joined her, helping to steady Windrunner. "Sarah, this isn't good," George murmured after examining the horse. "He's having a severe episode. We need to get him inside immediately." With the help of several strong men, they managed to carry Windrunner back to the stable. Sarah worked frantically to calm him, applying the techniques she had developed over the past few days. Slowly, the spasms subsided, but the horse remained lying down, exhausted and seemingly defeated by the episode. The celebration ended in a somber mood. Many of those present, who just minutes earlier had believed in the miracle of recovery, now exchanged skeptical glances. Perhaps George had been right all along. Maybe the most compassionate thing was indeed to end the animal's suffering. Sarah noticed the doubtful looks and expressions, but refused to give up. As everyone left, she stayed by Windrunner's side, whispering words of encouragement into his ear. It was during that long night that Sarah made a crucial observation. Mentally reviewing the day's events, she realized Windrunner's episode had been triggered by a sudden loud noise. Recalling the medical records, she noticed that several of his worsening episodes coincided with moving the horse to busier stables or during competition seasons, with their loud and abrupt sounds. "What if it's neurological, not muscular?" she murmured to herself, a new theory forming in her mind. The next morning, exhausted but determined, Sarah received another unexpected visitor. A young man around 25, carrying a worn backpack, stopped at the farm's entrance. "Dr. Sarah Mitchell?" he asked timidly. "My name is Matthew Anderson. I'm a veterinary student at CSU. My mother, Professor Andrea Wilson, asked me to come help you with the horse." Sarah immediately remembered Andrea, an old college friend who now taught at Colorado State University. "Matthew, it's so good to see you. Your mother called me yesterday, but I didn't expect you to come so quickly." I read the online article this morning, he explained, following Sarah to the stable, and I brought some recent papers on neurological conditions in equines that might be relevant, based on what my mother told me. When they entered the stable, Windrunner was standing again, though clearly shaken by the previous day's episode. Matthew approached cautiously, observing the animal with trained eyes. The tremors are consistent with myopathy, but watch how he reacts to sounds, he commented, clapping his hands softly. Windrunner flinched immediately. That's a classic neurological response. Over the next few hours, Sarah and Matthew conducted several improvised tests, meticulously documenting Windrunner's every reaction. The young student shared his knowledge of a rare condition he had recently studied, sound-responsive neuromuscular syndrome, SRNS, a still little-known disorder affecting both the nervous and muscular systems. Conventional myopathy treatment could worsen SRNS symptoms, Matthew explained, showing a recent article on his tablet. That would explain why he got worse with standard treatments. And how do we treat this? Sarah asked, a new hope rising in her heart. Matthew hesitated. There's an experimental protocol using low-intensity electrical stimulation combined with a specific nutritional regimen, but it's never been tested on advanced cases like this. Sarah looked at Windrunner, who met her gaze with what seemed like a spark of determination in his dark eyes. We're willing to try, she said firmly, Windrunner and I. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. The following weeks were filled with intense work. Matthew managed to borrow a low-intensity electrical stimulation device from the university lab. Sarah developed a special diet rich in specific nutrients that, according to Matthew's research, could aid in neurological regeneration. George, initially skeptical, ended up getting involved too, offering his medical expertise to fine-tune the protocols. The treatment was exhausting for everyone, especially for Windrunner. Each electrical stimulation session left the horse worn out, and the special diet, though nutritious, wasn't particularly tasty, requiring a lot of persuasion to get him to eat it. During this time, Jessica, the reporter, visited regularly to track progress and publish updates in the local paper. The story of the abandoned purebred horse and the retired vet who refused to give up on him captured the public's imagination. Donations started pouring in to help cover treatment costs, coming not just from the local community, but from animal lovers across the state. On the 20th day of treatment, something extraordinary happened. Sarah was leading Windrunner on his daily walk in the small paddock beside the stable when the horse suddenly picked up his pace. Instead of his usual slow, unsteady steps, he began to trot. It was a brief, shaky trot, lasting only a few seconds before he returned to a walk, but it was enough to bring Sarah to tears of joy. "Matthew! George! Come quick!" she shouted, not caring that it was 5 in the morning and her neighbors were still asleep. Jessica, who had stayed overnight at the farm to observe a late treatment session, captured the moment with her camera. The video of Windrunner trotting, even if briefly, went viral on social media within hours. The hashtag Sancha Windrunner Miracle started circulating, and the story quickly spread beyond the local paper, making headlines nationwide. It was this exposure that caught the attention of Dr. Richard Walker, a researcher at the University of California specializing in equine neurological disorders. He reached out to Sarah, expressing his interest in documenting Windrunner's case for a scientific study. "What you're doing is groundbreaking, Dr. Mitchell," he explained during a video call. "The combination of traditional techniques with the experimental protocol could open new doors for treating this condition." Sarah felt honored by the recognition, but remained cautious. "Dr. Walker, we're still early in the recovery. Windrunner has a long road ahead." "I completely understand," the researcher replied. "But I'd like to offer university resources to continue treatment, more advanced equipment, access to equine nutrition specialists, whatever you need." The offer was tempting, especially since the small farm's resources were running thin despite the donations. "I'd need to consult my team," Sarah answered, referring to Matthew and George, who had become integral to Windrunner's treatment. "And more importantly, I'd need assurance that Windrunner wouldn't be treated as a lab experiment. Absolutely, Dr. Walker assured. The animal's well-being will always come first. After consulting Matthew and George, Sarah accepted the offer. Dr. Walker sent state-of-the-art equipment and a team of assistants to document every aspect of the treatment. With the new resources, Windrunner's progress accelerated. His tremors had significantly decreased, and he could trot for increasingly longer periods. It seemed everything was finally heading toward a happy ending when Sarah received a visit that shook her to the core. Robert, her ex-husband, from whom she had been separated for 5 years, showed up unannounced at the farm. "Sarah," he greeted curtly, standing at the property's entrance. "We need to talk." Sarah felt a knot in her stomach. Their separation hadn't been amicable, and they had barely spoken since, communicating only through lawyers when necessary. "Robert, what are you doing here?" He looked around, taking in the improvements Sarah had made to the property over the years. "I came to talk about the farm. As you know, it's still partially in my name." It was true. In their rushed separation, Sarah had kept the property, but a quarter of it still legally belonged to Robert, an issue their lawyers were still trying to resolve. "And?" she asked, feeling her anxiety rise. "I'm in financial trouble, Sarah. I need to sell my share. I found a buyer interested in the entire land." Sarah felt as if the ground had vanished beneath her feet. "You can't do this. This is my home, my work, my life." Robert at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, but I need the money. The buyer made a generous offer." "Who's the buyer?" Sarah asked, though she already suspected the answer. "A businessman in the equestrian industry. Blackwood, I think." The confirmation hit her like a punch, out of the gut. Jonathan Blackwood was trying to force her to give up Windrunner by attacking from another angle. "Robert, please," Sarah begged, setting her pride aside. "I can't lose this farm, especially not now with so many animals depending on me." "I saw the news about the horse," Robert remarked, a hint of resentment in his voice. "You always put those animals before everything else, didn't you?" The comment stung, but Sarah didn't have time to reopen old wounds. "This isn't just another animal, Robert. What we're doing here could change how certain conditions are treated. It could save countless other horses in the future." Robert sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "Look, I'll give you a month to find another buyer who offers the same amount. That's the best I can do." When Robert left, Sarah felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. A month wasn't enough time to gather the money needed to buy out Robert's share, especially with all their resources already tied up in Windrunner's treatment. That night, a severe storm hit the area. Torrential rain and strong winds battered the small farm, tearing off roof tiles and flooding part of the property. Sarah and Matthew worked frantically to protect the animals, moving them to safer areas. Amid the storm's chaos, the roof of the main stable partially collapsed. Windrunner, frightened by the deafening noise of rain and thunder, broke through the fence of his enclosure and bolted in panic toward the higher part of the property. "Windrunner!" Sarah shouted desperately, trying to follow the horse through the pouring rain, but the darkness and storm made it impossible to spot him. For hours, Sarah, Matthew, and a few neighbors who came to help searched for the horse, using flashlights that barely cut through the curtain of rain. It wasn't until dawn, when the storm finally subsided, that they found Windrunner. To everyone's surprise, the horse stood at the top of a small hill, soaked and muddy but seemingly unharmed. Even more astonishing, when Sarah approached, Windrunner trotted toward her with more energy than they had ever seen before. "It's incredible," Matthew murmured, watching the horse move. "It's as if the physical effort and stress somehow stimulated his muscles." Sarah immediately remembered the article they'd read about SRNS. The article mentioned that in some rare cases, acute stress can cause a massive adrenaline release that temporarily suppresses symptoms, she said, leading Windrunner back to the makeshift stable they'd managed to protect from the storm. In the following days, Sarah and her team completely modified the treatment protocol. Instead of the near-total rest recommended for cases of equine degenerative myopathy, they began introducing controlled exercises for Windrunner. At first, it was just short walks, but gradually they progressed to trots and even brief gallops. Dr. Harris, who had initially questioned this approach that went against all medical recommendations, began meticulously documenting the changes, noting significant improvements in the animal's muscle tone and coordination. "It's like we're retraining his nervous system," he remarked after watching Windrunner complete a small exercise circuit without showing any tremors. Something we'd never consider for a traditional degenerative condition. News of Windrunners. Astonishing recovery continued to spread. Dr. Walker, impressed by the results, suggested presenting the case at an international veterinary medicine conference to be held in Los Angeles the following month. That was when Jonathan Blackwood reappeared. This time, however, he came with a different approach. "Dr. Mitchell," he began, with a politeness that contrasted with his earlier behavior. "I've come to admit I made a mistake trying to take Windrunner by force." Sarah watched him cautiously, keeping a safe distance. "And now? Now I'm here with a different proposal," replied Jonathan, flashing a rehearsed smile. "I want to buy Windrunner for a considerable sum. I'm genuinely interested in his remarkable recovery from a scientific standpoint." "Windrunner isn't for sale," Sarah said firmly. "5 times the market value for a horse of his lineage," Jonathan insisted. "Think what you could do with that money. How many other animals you could help. You might even buy out your ex-husband's share of the farm." Sarah hesitated. The offer was tempting, especially considering the looming threat of losing her property. But something about Jonathan's expression deeply unsettled her. "I need to think," she finally replied, "and consult my team." Jonathan smiled, pleased not to have received an immediate refusal. "Of course, take your time. I'll be in town for a few days." After Jonathan left, Sarah discussed the proposal with Matthew and George. Both seemed suspicious. "Why would he be willing to pay so much?" George questioned. "The amount is completely disproportionate, even for a purebred horse." "Maybe he's genuinely interested in the research," suggested Matthew, though his tone indicated he didn't believe that possibility himself. "There's something more," Sarah murmured, recalling the inconsistencies in Windrunner's earlier treatment. "We need to find out what it is." It was Jessica, the young reporter, who brought the missing piece of the puzzle. 2 days after Jonathan's visit, she showed up at the farm with a grave expression. "Dr. Mitchell, I found something you need to know," she said, opening her laptop. Jonathan Blackwood recently acquired Equine Health, a pharmaceutical company specializing in equine veterinary medicine. Sarah frowned, not immediately grasping the relevance of the information. And Equine Health is developing a drug to treat SRNS, Jessica explained, showing an article from a specialized journal. "A drug based on the same principles as your treatment." The realization hit Sarah like a bolt of lightning. "He wants our treatment protocol." "Exactly," Jessica confirmed. "And there's more. I found out the vet who treated Windrunner before, Dr. Thompson, is now the research director at Equine Health. The same one who seemed to sabotage Windrunner's treatment in the medical records," Sarah murmured, the pieces falling into place in her mind. "There are signs Equine Health was trying to develop a groundbreaking drug for SRNs, but their initial trials failed," Jessica continued. "I think they were using Windrunner as a test subject, documenting the failure of conventional treatments to highlight the need for their new drug. And when their drug also failed, they wrote Windrunner off as a lost cause," Sarah concluded, feeling a wave of anger. "But now that you're succeeding with an alternative method," Jessica left the sentence hanging. "They want to take the method for themselves," Matthew finished, "patent it and sell it exclusively." "We can't allow that," Sarah declared firmly. "This treatment needs to be available to all animals suffering from this condition, not just those whose owners can pay an exorbitant price." Jessica's article, published the next day, exposed Jonathan Blackwood and Equine Health's intentions. The story of Windrunner's miraculous recovery and a big pharmaceutical company's attempt to monopolize the treatment sparked public outrage. In response, Dr. Walker suggested Sarah present Windrunner's case at the international conference, meticulously documenting every step of the treatment so it would become public knowledge, impossible to patent exclusively. "I have to do this," Sarah told Matthew and George. "If we publish our method, Jonathan won't be able to patent it." "But you've never spoken in public before," George reminded her, concerned. "Are you sure you're ready?" Sarah looked at Windrunner, grazing peacefully in the small paddock, his movements not yet fully normal but incredibly better than a few weeks ago. For him, I'm ready for anything. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. The week before the conference was intense. With Matthew and Dr. Walker's help, Sarah prepared a detailed presentation on Windrunner's case, including videos, medical records, and a step-by-step explanation of the Mitchell protocol. George helped her practice, offering tips to calm her nerves. The decision to leave Windrunner in Matthew's care while she was away was hard but necessary. The conference would only last 3 days, but it was the first time since her arrival that Sarah would be away from the horse for more than a few hours. "He'll be fine," Matthew assured her the morning she left. "We'll follow the protocol exactly, and I'll call twice a day with updates." Sarah hugged Windrunner, whispering in his ear, "I'll be back soon, champ. Be good for Matthew." The horse responded with a soft whinny, as if he understood. The conference in Los Angeles was overwhelming for Sarah. Hundreds of veterinarians from around the world gathered in a massive convention center, discussing the latest advances in veterinary medicine. Her presentation was scheduled for the second day, in the Innovative Case Studies section. The night before her presentation, Sarah got an alarming call from Matthew. "Sarah, something's wrong," the young man said, his voice tense. "Windrunner seems to have relapsed. He can barely stand and the tremors are back full force." Sarah's heart raced. "What happened? Was there any change in the protocol?" "No, we followed your instructions exactly. The only difference was the new batch of special feed that arrived yesterday. We started using it this morning." "New batch?" Sarah felt a chill of worry. "Who delivered it?" "A delivery man I'd never seen before. He said it was from the usual supplier, but they were having system issues, so they couldn't notify us in advance." "Matthew, stop using that feed immediately," Sarah ordered. "Use the emergency mix we prepared. I'm heading back right now." Sarah cancelled her participation in the conference, explaining the emergency to Dr. Walker, who understood the situation immediately. He offered to present the case in her place, using the material they had prepared together. The trip back to Boulder felt endless. When she finally arrived at the farm in the early hours of the next morning, she found George and Matthew in the stable, both wearing worried expressions as they watched Windrunner, who lay trembling violently in the straw. "How is he?" Sarah asked, immediately kneeling beside the animal. "Stable, but no improvement since." "We stopped the new feed," George replied. "I collected samples and sent them for emergency analysis at the university lab." Sarah examined Windrunner meticulously, her heart tightening at the sight of him so weakened again. All the progress of the past weeks seemed to have vanished. "We need to find out what was in that feed," she murmured, gently massaging the horse's tense muscles. "And who sent it?" The answer came the next morning when Dr. Walker called from Los Angeles. "Sarah, I have news," he said, his voice urgent. "The feed analysis results are in. We found traces of a neuromuscular blocker that directly interferes with the treatment we've been applying." "Sabotage," Sarah concluded, feeling a wave of anger. "Jonathan Blackwood." "Most likely," Walker agreed, "but we have proof now. And one more thing. I presented your case yesterday, and the conference's ethics committee was alarmed by the possible manipulation of Windrunner's previous treatments. They're launching a formal investigation." The news of the possible sabotage and investigation spread quickly. Jessica published a detailed article, including the preliminary results of the feed analysis. Public outrage grew even stronger, culminating in protests outside Equine Health's headquarters. Meanwhile, Sarah, Matthew, and George worked tirelessly to reverse the effects of the neuromuscular blocker on Windrunner. The process was slow and frustrating, with minimal progress in the first few days. It was during this difficult time that Robert, Sarah's ex-husband, reappeared at the farm. This time, however, his demeanor was different. "I saw the report," he said simply. "Is it true? Did they try to poison the horse?" Sarah nodded too, exhausted to elaborate. Robert looked around the farm, noticing the improvements she had made, the dedicated work with the animals, and especially the extraordinary effort to save Windrunner. "You've always been stubborn," he remarked, a faint smile on his lips. "Always believed you could change the world one animal at a time." "What do you want, Robert?" Sarah asked, too drained to revisit old arguments. "I came to say I've taken the farm off the market," he replied, surprising her, "and I want to transfer my share to your name. No cost." Sarah's eyes widened, unable to believe what she'd heard. "Why?" Robert shrugged, a gesture that masked the emotion in his voice. "Because you were right, Sarah. You always were. This place," he gestured broadly at the farm, "it matters. What you do matters, and I have no right to take that from you or these animals." The words hung in the air for a moment, heavy with meaning and a long overdue acknowledgement Sarah Mitchell never expected to receive. "Thank you," she finally said, her voice choked with emotion. Robert nodded and after a brief hesitation asked, "Can I see the famous Windrunner?" Sarah led him to the stable, where the horse lay still, recovering from the effects of the blocker. Even weakened there was a dignity about Windrunner that struck Robert. "He's special," he remarked. "I can see why you fought so hard for him." "They're all special, Robert," Sarah replied softly. "They just need someone to believe in them." In the days that followed, the investigation into equine health and Jonathan Blackwood progressed quickly. Leaked internal documents revealed the company had indeed falsified previous research results and used Windrunner as a test subject without following proper ethical protocols. Public and legal pressure grew so intense that Jonathan was forced to step down as company president. Equine Health issued an official statement apologizing for what had happened and pledging full cooperation with the investigations. Meanwhile, Windrunner continued his slow recovery. The neuromuscular blocker had caused a significant setback, but gradually the horse began responding to treatment again. Sarah, Matthew, and George took shifts, ensuring Windrunner received round-the-clock care. 3 weeks after the tainted feed incident, Windrunner managed to stand on his own again. A week later, he took his first hesitant steps around the stable, and finally, nearly 2 months after his relapse, the majestic chestnut trotted around the small training ring Sarah had built, especially for his exercises. Windrunner's recovery coincided with the official publication of the Mitchell Protocol, the treatment method developed by Sarah and her team. Published in a prestigious scientific journal and made freely available online, the protocol quickly became the standard for treating SRNS and other neuromuscular conditions in horses. A year after Windrunner's arrival at New Beginning Farm, Sarah could hardly recognize the skeletal, trembling horse in the majestic animal now galloping freely through the pastures. His coat had regained its shine, his muscles were nearly fully restored, and his eyes radiated a vitality that charmed everyone who met him. The farm had transformed. With support from the university and donations from animal lovers across the country, Sarah expanded the facilities, creating a true rehabilitation center for animals with conditions once deemed untreatable. Matthew, who had initially come only to help temporarily, decided to complete his internship at New Beginning Farm, learning directly from Sarah. George, the once skeptical neighbor, became a regular collaborator, offering his medical expertise for complex cases. On a sunny spring afternoon, Sarah watched Windrunner running through the pasture, accompanied by a small group of children with special needs who visited the farm regularly for equine therapy sessions. The horse, once given up for lost, now helped others overcome their own limitations. Jessica, who had come to write a follow-up story, approached quietly. "It's a beautiful sight, isn't it?" she remarked, watching the children laugh as Windrunner gently let them stroke his muzzle. "More than beautiful," Sarah replied, tears in her eyes. "It's a miracle, not in the mystical sense, but in the way that sometimes, when we refuse to give up, life finds a way." "The Mitchell Protocol has already helped dozens of other horses," Jessica said, "and the method is being adapted for other species too." Sarah smiled, watching Windrunner. The horse lifted his head at that moment, as if sensing her gaze, and neighed softly in her direction. "You know what's most amazing about all this?" said Sarah, her voice filled with emotion. "It wasn't us who saved Windrunner. It was him who saved us. He gave me a new purpose, brought this community together, inspired all these people." Jessica nodded, understanding the depth of those words. "So, what's next for New Beginning?" "Farm." Sarah looked toward the horizon where the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in golden and orange hues that reflected off Windrunner's gleaming coat. "We keep working, one animal at a time, one small revolution at a time." As the children led Windrunner back to the stable, guided by the attentive Matthew, Sarah felt deep gratitude. For that horse no one wanted, for the challenge that had transformed her life, for the chance to prove that even when the odds are stacked against you, it's worth believing in the impossible. Because sometimes miracles don't come from extraordinary places or divine interventions. They come from persistence, knowledge, compassion, and the refusal to accept that something is beyond saving. And that, Sarah reflected as she walked back home with the sunset at her back, was perhaps the most important lesson Windrunner had taught them all. The end of the story. Dear listener, if this story touched your heart, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Tell us in the comments what you thought of Sarah and Windrunner's journey, and if you've ever witnessed a miracle like this. Your company is what motivates us to keep going.